The one detail everyone missed. A Miss Marple mystery. Hi there. Welcome back to Haunting Vales. Tonight's mystery begins with a case that seemed already solved. The villagers were satisfied, the explanations accepted, and the truth, or what passed for it, neatly agreed upon. In St. Mary Mead, everything appeared to make perfect sense. Everything, except one small detail. It was so minor, no one gave it a second thought. So ordinary, it blended into the background. And yet Miss Marple noticed it immediately. A detail out of place, a moment that didn't quite fit, a truth hidden in plain sight. As she begins to follow that single thread, the entire story starts to unravel, revealing that what everyone believed may have been carefully constructed from the very beginning. Because sometimes it only takes one overlooked detail to expose the biggest lie of all. Before we uncover what everyone else failed to see, don't forget to subscribe for more haunting Miss Marple mysteries on Haunting Vales. Chapter 1. The Detail No One Saw. The village had a way of smoothing things over, not out of malice, you understand, more out of habit. Life moved in quiet circles there. Tea at 4, letters in the post by morning, and the same familiar faces passing by the same familiar hedges. Nothing ever truly broke the rhythm. And when something did, well, it was quickly folded back into something easier to accept. So, when Mr. Harold Finch was found at the bottom of his staircase, the explanation came swiftly. Too swiftly. A fall, a simple misstep in poor light. Regrettable, yes, but hardly suspicious. People shook their heads, spoke in hushed tones for a day or two, and then returned to their routines as though the matter had neatly resolved itself. But neat things are often misleading. Miss Marple sat by her window that afternoon, her knitting resting lightly in her hands, the soft click of her needles marking time in a way that felt almost deliberate. She had heard the news, of course. Everyone had. News in a village like that travelled faster than common sense. She listened more than she spoke, as she always did. The constable had been quite certain. He spoke of the staircase, of the worn edges, of how easily a man might lose his footing if he weren't paying attention. A loose section of carpet had been mentioned, poor lighting too, all very reasonable, all very tidy. Too tidy. Miss Marple's needles paused mid-stitch, though her expression remained perfectly calm. She didn't argue, she didn't interrupt, but something in her mind had already begun to turn, slow and steady, like a key finding its place in a lock. Mr. Harold Finch wasn't the sort of man to rush, quite the opposite. He was careful to a fault, the kind of man who checked the door twice before bed, who avoided unnecessary risks, who preferred order over spontaneity in all things. Even his movements reflected it, deliberate, measured, predictable, and most notably, cautious on the stairs. He always held the banister, always. People had remarked on it, quietly amused by such an obvious habit. But habits like that don't disappear, not suddenly, not without reason. So how does a careful man fall? Miss Marple's gaze drifted beyond the garden, though she saw none of the garden before her. Her thoughts were elsewhere now, piecing together fragments that others hadn't even thought to collect. Because the fall itself wasn't the question. The question was, what made it happen? There's always something, a cause, a shift, a moment where the ordinary becomes something else entirely. And when that moment is missing, when no one can quite point to it, it means one thing. It's been hidden. The village, in its quiet confidence, had accepted the simplest answer.
but Miss Marple had lived long enough to know that simple answers often hide complicated truths. And somewhere buried beneath polite conversation and easy conclusions, there was a detail no one had seen. Not yet.
Chapter 2. The Detail That Didn't Fit. The Finch house stood as it always had, neat, orderly, unchanged on the surface. But there's a peculiar stillness that settles over a place when its owner is gone. Not emptiness exactly, something heavier, as though the house itself knows something it cannot say. Miss Marple stepped inside with quiet care, her movements unhurried, her presence almost delicate against the silence. She didn't need to touch much. She didn't need to disturb anything. Observing was quite enough. The staircase rose ahead, narrow and steep, the sort that demanded respect. Every step showed signs of long use, but nothing careless, nothing reckless. It was a staircase meant for someone who paid attention, someone who didn't make mistakes, which made the story of a sudden fall all the more curious. Miss Marple approached slowly, her fingers brushing lightly against the banister. Smooth wood, well kept, the sort of surface that had been held countless times, always in the same careful manner. There was comfort in that repetition, stability. She paused halfway, her eyes lowering just slightly. The carpet. At first glance it appeared perfectly ordinary, patterned, neatly laid, consistent with the rest of the house. But Miss Marple didn't deal in first glances. She looked again, and then again. There, just at the edge. It didn't quite align. Not by much, not enough to draw attention, but enough. The edge had shifted ever so slightly, as though disturbed and then pressed back into place with hurried care. It lacked the quiet precision the rest of the house seemed to maintain so effortlessly. A small thing, but small things matter. Miss Marple crouched, her expression thoughtful, her mind already moving ahead of the evidence. Carpets do not move on their own, not like that, not without cause, and certainly not in a house where everything else remained so carefully arranged. Someone was here. Someone moved it, and then tried to hide the fact that they had. Her gaze shifted upward, tracing the line of the staircase to its top. The position made sense. If one were to interfere, that is precisely where one would stand. But there was more. There's always more. A faint mark caught her eye, barely visible against the muted tones of the step. Mud, just a trace, the sort that might be overlooked entirely, someone not expecting to find it. But Miss Marple had been expecting something. Mr. Finch hadn't left the house that evening, that much was known, so the mud did not belong to him. Which meant it belonged to someone else. The air in the house seemed to grow heavier, though nothing had changed. Miss Marple rose slowly, her hands folding together as her thoughts settled into something firmer now. The pieces were beginning to take shape, not fully formed, not yet, but enough to point in a very different direction than the one everyone had so comfortably accepted. This wasn't carelessness, this wasn't chance, this was arrangement, carefully done, quietly executed, designed to look ordinary, to pass without question, and it almost had. Almost. Miss Marple allowed herself a small, thoughtful pause, her gaze lingering on the staircase as though it might still reveal something more if given enough time. Because even the most careful plans leave something behind,
a shift, a mark, a detail that didn't quite fit. And when one finds such a detail, one must ask a rather uncomfortable question. Who was here, and why?
Chapter 3. The One Detail Everyone Missed. The room filled slowly, one person at a time, drawn together by curiosity they tried, rather unsuccessfully, to disguise as concern. Chairs creaked, soft murmurs passed between them. No one quite met anyone else's eyes for too long. The constable stood near the fireplace, composed but uncertain, as though something had slipped beyond his grasp. Mrs. Dalloway clutched her handbag tightly, her expression caught somewhere between fascination and dread. Miss Marple stood quietly to one side, unassuming, almost fragile in appearance, but entirely certain. She didn't speak at once. She let the room settle, let the tension build just enough that silence became uncomfortable. People reveal more in silence than they ever do in conversation. Then, at last, she began. "It's quite simple," she said gently. "Mr. Finch did not fall by accident." The words landed softly, but their effect was immediate. A shift in the room, a tightening. Someone inhaled sharply, someone else shifted in their seat. Miss Marple continued, her tone steady, almost conversational. "There are, of course, details that suggest another presence. The carpet, the mud, small things but telling ones." The constable nodded faintly, though it was clear he hadn't fully grasped their importance until now. "But those are not the most important details," she added. A pause. A longer one this time. "Those are the ones meant to be overlooked or explained away." Her gaze moved slowly across the room, resting briefly on each face, as though measuring their reactions, weighing them. "The truth lies in something far quieter," she said. No one spoke. "Mr. Finch was a careful man, that much we all know, and like all careful men he had habits, consistent ones, predictable ones." She let that settle. "He always held the banister with his right hand when using the stairs. Always. It was second nature to him." A flicker of understanding passed through the constable's expression. Too late, but there. "When he was found," Miss Marple continued, her voice calm, almost conversational, "the marks told a different story. The bruising, the pressure, all on the left side, his left hand." Silence pressed in from all sides now. "He did not fall naturally," she said softly. "He was turned, forced, pushed from a position that does not match his habit." A chair creaked, someone shifted, the air itself seemed to hold still. Miss Marple's eyes settled, quiet and knowing. To arrange such a thing requires familiarity, observation, someone who knew his routine well enough to replicate it, but not well enough to do so perfectly. And there it was, the mistake, the one detail, the thing everyone had missed, because they were looking at what was present instead of what was wrong. Miss Marple allowed the silence to stretch just a moment longer before stepping back, her part finished. The truth had already begun to settle into the room, heavy and undeniable. It would take time for it to fully take hold, but it would. It always did. She returned to her chair, her knitting resuming with quiet precision, as though the matter required no further attention. But the others would not forget. They couldn't. Because the most dangerous lies are not the ones we are told, they are the ones we accept without question. And once you begin to notice the small details, the quiet ones, the ones that don't quite fit, you start to wonder how many other truths have been hiding in plain sight. If you enjoy stories where one tiny mistake changes everything, stay with me. There's always another mystery waiting, and next time
you might spot the detail before anyone else does.